let's paint our skin color map. First, I want to rename this tab Image View so I can use it later if I need, and switch to the Texture Paint workspace. Okay, this will put a UV image editor on the left and our 3D view on the right. And it also jumps into Texture Paint mode. I want to go to Object mode and just make sure our head is selected, and then / key to go to Local View. Now, I find that I need to split the image editor on the left so that the bottom half is a shader editor, and I'll leave the upper half for the 2D skin texture, because all three of these panels are pretty important whenever you're texture painting. Remember, you always need to have the proper texture node that you want to be manipulating. And so we will duplicate one of these texture nodes. I will click the 2 button to make it unique and rename it to be, let's see, skin _ color in caps. And then hit the N key to bring up the view properties. And under properties, let's change from source image to generated. And I'm going to go down in resolution to 2048 by 2048. And the reason is Blender's texture painting system is not the most robust. And in my rehearsals, painting a 4K texture did get a bit laggy. So bumping down the resolution can help there, but also this is not going to be a detailed texture. It's going to be much more broad. And so we can afford that lower texture resolution. And then for the color, we can color pick from our reference image. So let me load the CC0 skin color. And I'm going to pick a face that most closely resembles the one we're creating, or just if I want one specifically. I think this one is going to be pretty close. So let's color pick a middle of the road skin tone. Maybe the side of the nose, the cheek. There we go, something like that. It's not terribly important, but it will serve as the base canvas for all the colors we're going to add on top. And now if we switch back to our texture paint mode, we see our color texture, which I can view frame all, so it fits up here in this upper window. Now that we've got the correct image texture node selected, I can switch to shader view to be the image editor and load our reference. We'll start with skin color simplified. We don't need to see the UVs, so in view, display texture paint UVs, we can turn off in both of these. And then as far as the visualization in the 3D view, you can see by default we still have viewport shading enabled, which just like our reference photography can throw off our understanding of the color. And so to see the authentic version of the color, we can switch our viewport shading to be flat. All right, and this is no shading whatsoever, just the pure color information. The only problem is we can't really see any facial features like where the eyes are, where the nose is. And we kind of need that information to place our strokes. So what I like to do is add the cavity overlay, change it to world, turn the ridge all the way down, and in the valley, take that down so it's very subtle. And this just outlines the facial features enough for us to see them, but hopefully not too much to throw off our understanding of the color. And let's see, I am painting without the multi-res enabled. It works fine with multi-res enabled. I'll start with that on. But I am pretty sure that it can slow down the painting strokes. So if we see it get laggy, I'll probably turn off multi-res. And yeah, if you're thinking, wow, texture painting is kind of finicky, it is. It'll get the job done, but again, it's not very robust, and we kind of have to cater to the system in order to get the best results. And then one more very important setting before we get started. In texture paint mode, all the way to the right, we have our options. And the default bleed value is set to 2. Now the bleed is the same thing as the margin from whenever we bake the texture. So it's how the color extends beyond the UV border. And 2 pixels is way too low. You will easily risk anti-aliased UV seams if you keep it this low. I'm going to bump it up to 10, just like our texture bake settings. And then the first thing I want to do for our color is go ahead and implement the zones of the face. All right, that will get us started on the right foot. And so an important thing you'll see me turn on and off is the ability to occlude the geometry. So think if you have a spray paint can and you spray this side of the model, the other side will not be sprayed. It'll be blocked by the part of the model that's directly facing the spray can. And so by default, that's how Blender has it set up. In the options, your occlude and backface culling. And then there's also another relevant setting in fall off called normal fall off. And so these 3 settings I will commonly turn on and off. On if I want that occlusion effect like the spray paint. Off if I want to just spray all the way through the model. And honestly, anytime where that's possible, that's going to be the fastest approach, because these three settings do slow down the painting process a bit and it can get laggy. So I'm going to turn those off and keep them off as much as possible. So I'm going to grab my pen and we're going to choose a yellow color for the top. All right, so if we select the color, if you don't see this bar up at the very top, you'll want to right click over the texture paint icon, header, and show tool settings. You can also find these settings in the tool properties. They're pretty much a duplicate set, even though some are missing from the tool shelf. But here's where you can access that color. We're going to select the color, and anytime you can choose the eyedropper tool and click anywhere in the user interface to source that color. And I'm going to then manipulate this into the yellow direction. All right, something like this. All right, so that's pretty saturated, but I'm almost never going to paint at full strength with our brush. So I'll hit Shift F. First, though, let me enable screencast keys. And Shift F to take our strength down to like 0.2, 0.3. That's where I like to hang out whenever I'm painting in here. So at that low strength, also, before I forget, I tend to like the sharp fall off for our brush. Okay, so that's this pointed one. That's going to be the softest around the edges. All right, so hit 3 in the viewport to go to side view, and I'm just going to paint on the forehead area. And you can see how that was kind of slow getting started. Another thing that seems to make Blender's painting slow is the size of the brush. The smaller the brush, the quicker the painting. But the larger the brush, and that error just happens sometimes. I don't think it's important. But the larger the brush, you'll definitely see a slowdown, so just beware of that. All right, so now we've kind of have this yellow tinted forehead area. Then we'll switch to our red color, reddish orange. Again, overly saturated, but since I'm never painting at full strength, it balances out. And so we'll do the same thing here around the middle. That looks to be a little bit too strong. Let's undo that. Take the strength down to like 0.2. Make sure if you're using a pen and tablet to have your pressure sensitivity enabled, which it is. All right, that looks good. And then finally, at the bottom, we're going to go darker and into the kind of cyan range, but just a little bit colored that way. More gray than green. And then we'll paint on the bottom third. Okay, so that's got us started out with the zones of the face. And next we can start painting according to our reference. So I've loaded the simplified color reference so that we can pick, simplified versions of the color palette. However, you've seen that I like to choose overly saturated colors since I'm painting at a low strength. And if I were to photo source the true colors, you really should paint at full strength, which is a very harsh way to work. I really like keeping the strength low to keep everything balanced and smooth and broad gradients. So that is especially where the saturated version of our photo reference comes in handy. So I'll switch over to the saturated version. All right, so I'm going to start around the eye area by painting in some of the darker orangish brown colors. All right, so unfortunately, we don't have a hotkey for color picking in the image editor. We do in the 3D view. If you hold S and then wherever you let go, it will color source that pixel, but it doesn't work in the 3D view. You can see that it only turns to black up here. So we just have to click on the color and then the eyedropper and then it will work. All right, so with that color selected, keep in mind I am painting through the model. So whenever I make a stroke, it's going all the way to the back of the head. If we undo that, you can see that happening. And that's okay, because if I undo that and instead turn on the occlude, backface culling, and normal fall off, our stroke is going to be much slower, as you can see, but also it's being occluded. So if I enable our eyes closed, mouth open shape, I just noticed that's named incorrectly. It should be called eyes closed, mouth open. But you see what the occlusion effect does. It doesn't paint the part of the eyelid that's covered up. So it's really important to paint through the mesh as much as possible. And so what I do is compromise by first undoing those strokes, and I leave off occlude, backface culling, and normal fall off, and just accept that the back of the head is going to get all these extraneous strokes, because it's going to be easy to paint over that after the fact. But it's, again, really important to paint without occluding to avoid occlusion artifacts. Now I see that there's a bit of an issue here. I do have X symmetry enabled, so let's quickly S to color pick that area and then paint over this artifact. Okay, and then color pick one more time the dark orangish color. And, you know, I should keep in mind that this is in shadow, right? All of our photo references are going to have shadow information that we need to be aware of. And so what I'll do to kind of compensate for that is maybe brighten up the value a little bit. That's kind of eliminating that shadow information in theory. It's a lot to think about. Just stay with me. You'll see by the end of this video that it's really not that complex. All right, so let's paint around the eye, kind of broad strokes, and then gradually increasing the strength of the effect in certain areas, especially that inside corner. And then on the outside, let's color pick again. This is a little bit brighter in color, a little bit more yellowy too. And keep in mind the angle with which I'm painting is sending that extra color just to the back of the head, and that's fine. You want to be careful if you paint like this, because that's sending the extra color to the ear, which is not so fine. And actually, it made a streak all the way across the face. So I know it's a cumbersome way to work, but you want to basically project your paint in a perpendicular fashion so your extra strokes, you know, go in a least consequential area. Wow, hearing me describe this kind of reveals how unintuitive Blender's painting system is. I really hope to see some upgrades. It's got so much potential, but definitely cumbersome to work with right now. Anyway, enough complaining. Let's get back to the coloring. And, you know, you can see this kind of artifact. Anytime you see a sharp shelf of color, that's the artifact that we want to avoid from occlusion. So I'll just S to color pick and then paint over that. And then I can actually see a bit of pink here right in the middle, which I think is more noticeable because of the simplified palette that we've established. So let's select that and paint it more pink. And as you train your eye, what I like to do is exaggerate that color a little bit more. So I know that that's more pink than the corners of the eye, and I'll just push it a little more towards pink, maybe a little bit brighter as well to eliminate the shadows. And then we'll paint right in the middle. And these artifacts are coming about. I wonder why. Is my bleed value too high? Let's see the UVs. And what I'm looking for, yeah, I think maybe in this area, 10 pixels is too much. Ah, okay, so that's something I didn't really think about. Closing the eyes and laying out the UVs keeps their seams too close together. Okay, well here's another option then. I can paint directly on the 2D texture. All right, so we'll take that pink, we'll paint it, and then maybe take the blur value or the blur brush, blur that stuff out, maybe do it in the 3D view as well. And maybe in this area specifically, I'll take down the bleed value to, I mean, I guess 2. I really don't like that value, but I sort of created an issue for us by putting these seams so close together. Also, let's not stress out too much. It doesn't need to be perfect. This is going to be good enough. If we happen to see that artifact in the render, we can come back and touch it up, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. So it's best to not get hung up on that stuff too early. I really want to progress in establishing a solid skin tone base texture. So I think our eye is in pretty good shape for now. You know, it's still a little bit light, so maybe I should darken it a little bit. You know, compared to the reference, I don't think it's this dark only based on shadows. So let's go back to our paintbrush, and then we'll choose one of these darker values. Here we go. Kind of fill that in. Maybe put a little bit more pink. Keep a low value on the brush. There we go. I think that's a good start. And then we can grab this more orangey tone on the side of the nose. All right, so it's a pretty simple operation of just color picking what we see. I usually like to exaggerate it just a little bit more. So making that slightly more orange and then painting on the side of the nose. And painting in other places where we might see that kind of tone. It seems to swoop around the zygomatic bone here. Yeah, you can see this kind of yellow tint all the way down. So let's color pick that. It looks a little more yellow than orange to me. All right, something like this. And then just paint down that area. There also seems to be some kind of reddish mixed in. So let's grab a red value, reddish pink. Just touch some areas down here. All right, so sticking to your pinks, your oranges, yellows, and even purples, those are going to be your go-to colors. And don't get too married to a single color in a certain area. It's always better to see a combination of these colors throughout the face. All right, so you'll see me try and do that, build up a combination rather than just rely on one color. You don't really see it in this image so much, but in this one you do. The nose often has a little more of a red tint. So I'm going to implement that from the side here, and then maybe darken it a little bit in the crevices. Maybe slightly following the nasolabial fold. Okay, now let's go back over here. It's kind of hard to see without their faces being shaved. This one's pretty close, I suppose. All right, so there's definitely more pink in the upper lip here. You know, I am going to photo source from another photo, but they are pretty close in skin tone, so that's okay. You might get into trouble if you try and mix clearly different ethnicities and their skin tones. I don't know, maybe it would be fine, but as a general principle, I try and only photo source from similar ones. And so it definitely feels more pink. So we'll add that. Let's see, darken the below the nose, around the philtrum. And now we're getting into the lips. So this is going to be a very obvious color difference. So let's pick a good example. Well, let's think. Are they still pretty similar? I'm looking at this pair and this pair. These seem a little more pinkish purpley, and this seems a little more toward orange. I mean, very subtly different. But let's go with this. I think I like this tone of lip a little bit better. And where to pick from. So I recommend something on the bottom here. The top is going to be a little too drastically different. There's a shadow involved. Remember, the light is going to shadow the upper lip more than the bottom. So we'll just pick one of the pinks. Well, that one seems a little bit too bright. I don't want the highlighted speck part of the lips. Okay, let's go with that one. Painting the lips is very specific, so I don't think I'm going to be able to paint without a mask. Okay, so we can use our mesh selection to mask where we're painting. And what I mean is when I start painting the lips, I need to be able to do it from various different angles. And I don't want all that paint being projected all over the place in the back. And so an option that we have is to tab into edit mode, and I'm going to select a face loop in the back, or hit A twice to make sure I don't have anything selected. And selection seems pretty slow. Let's just manually go to none, select none. All right, so I'm going to select a face loop, Control plus to grow the selection until we get just outside of the lips, about here. Okay, so now tab back to texture paint mode, and I can enable selection masking, okay? And by default, you see where that is available. But again, that's kind of throwing off my sense of the skin tone. So just disable overlays, and now we're ready to paint. And when I do, it will project into the mouth cavity, but it will not project to the back of the head, okay? Or to the shoulders for that matter. Again, I don't care so much about the back of the head, but all the other areas is a little annoying. So I really need to see where that vermilion border is when I'm painting this color. And it's not enough to see it in the flat shading. So I'm going to go back to Studio so I can very clearly see where the vermilion border is and just paint right up to that line. I did change the strength of my brush to 1. And I'm basically painting lipstick on this person. Also notice how different the shaded view is. It would be really difficult to paint an accurate skin color when you have this much shading on the model. But yeah, I don't know about this skin tone. That's definitely looking more like lipstick. What's it look like flat? Okay, that must not have been the right color. You know what I did? I selected it in the saturated reference. That is not what I want. I want to switch it to just the simplified, the regular saturation. And then I'm also going to pin the reference image here. And let's pick that a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so let's try painting this again with a better color selected. Yeah, that's already feeling more natural. And make sure that I have occlusion turned off. Yes. It really bothers me when it lags on a stroke. If you're coming from a Substance Painter background or Mari, I can guarantee you're going to be disappointed with Blender's texture painting. It's going to feel very, very underdeveloped by comparison. But if Blender is all you know, then you're used to this kind of thing. I don't mean to harp on Blender, but the texture painting definitely needs a lot of love. Okay, so I've outlined where the lip color ends at the vermilion border. We can go back to flat shading, and I still have cavity enabled. Okay, good. All right, so that's going to be a decent skin tone to start off with. Now, I do want to go ahead and fill inside the mouth cavity because that should all be one color, the same color as the lips. And so I'll go back to texture edit mode rather, and re-enabled our overlays Control- to deselect until we get to the inside of the lip. I don't know why gross selection is so slow. All right, maybe one more, and then I'm going to use the fill brush in texture paint mode. But what's kind of weird is that the fill brush has a different default color. I always think that's strange to not keep it consistent. So you'll want to hover over the brush color, Control-C, jump over to the fill brush, Control-V, and then click to paint. All right. So that looks pretty good. Now I'll go back to the paintbrush, and I'm going to hit S to select our flesh tone, and very lightly at a value, again, back to like 0.2, I'm just going to kind of soften the vermilion border area. It doesn't need to be such a sharp fall off. So this is where I will turn on occlude backface culling, disable selection masking, and I'll re-enable normal fall off. And since I'm using a small brush, it shouldn't lag, so we should be safe there. And just kind of blurring out that sharp fall off at the vermilion border. Now, while I'm thinking about it, I should probably save my texture before Blender crashes on me and I lose it, because by default, this is only stored in RAM. So we need to save it to our disk. And the way I can do that up here in the image editor is we'll go to our image properties and choose save. And I will save this in our texture directory, skin color, same place as our other textures. I'll save it as RGB, we don't need an alpha, and I will save it as 16-bit color depth and save as image. Okay, now we just need to remember to save this periodically. Might as well leave this panel open as a reminder. All right, we're slowly but surely making our way around the face, addressing the various skin tones. Now, we started with that darker color in the bottom third. I'm going to continue that in the spirit of a beard, kind of 5 o'clock shadow, by going to a darker, slightly grayish, teal, greenish color. And I'm just going to outline where the beard is. Basically, same as this image, but much more subtle. All right, so we'll keep the value maybe even below 0.2. Just kind of touch these areas. In my opinion, we are getting a little too far into this area. It's looking less like skin. There's like no reddish tones, and we're going to add those in a little bit. But I do find that keeping it a bit splotchier helps. And also, I think I'll take this up into the scalp a little bit and hint at a hairline. Just a hint. We're not going crazy, but just hint at the hairline. And once we're done painting the majority of the face, I'll fix the back of the head, and we can add that hairline back there as well. Okay, all right, so that's enough of that grayish color. To me, that's way too strong. So now we need to start bringing in the warmer tones. And we can get reference for this, switching back to our simplified saturated reference. And you can clearly see there's a lot of orange here that has no presence in our current texture. All right, so I'll just straight up color pick that and start to apply that, in various places. Under the lip, it seems to get fairly dark orange as well. I'm going to leave it fairly light right around the vermilion border. I think that's supported in the reference. Let's go back to adding orange and then also some more pinkish tones. And keep in mind, you can keep two colors ready to choose from. So if I hit X, that will switch the color swatches. Same as over here in our tool properties. So hitting X switches those. And I can choose a pink and more readily swap between the two. And if you don't want to paint this symmetrical, I think that's a pretty good approach. I'm a little lazy and I like to get both sides at the same time. But of course our skin tones are not perfectly symmetrical. So perhaps you could do the whole thing asymmetrically, or occasionally turning off symmetry and introducing asymmetry manually. But remembering that you could turn that back on once you get away from the horizon of symmetry. But these two dark spots here, I think, are a little too obvious. I'm going to try and kind of paint that one out. Just hit S, color pick an area near it. All right, save our image periodically. And that's looking pretty good for the chin area. Now, what about the neck? You know, that's not really included in the zones of the face, but we can see from the reference that it tends to get a more orange. All right, so let's grab an orangish color. Also, it seems to be darker. And in my experience, the back of the neck tends to be the darkest. I think because it probably gets more sun in general. But for this, we can turn off occlude and backface culling. When you have a big brush and those settings enabled, it really gets slow. So we'll turn those off. Normal fall off as well. Now it should be much faster. I'm just going to paint around the neck this darker orangish color. And then maybe a brighter orange as well. That's sort of what we see in the reference. And then there was one image down here. Okay, this is a little more clear. It's like a yellowish light flesh tone up top or in the upper third of the neck, and then it turns to a more saturated orange, and then it turns to like a pinkish once you get to the collarbone. So I think we'll implement that, going for kind of a skin tone pink down here at the base. And so I don't have symmetry enabled. That's good to know, but since we were painting through the mesh from the side, it's automatically symmetrical. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. I don't need to worry about the shoulders so much. I guess we could if we wanted to. Oh, remember I've got the other orange on the other color swatch. So we could add some to the shoulders, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be covered by our clothing eventually. So it's not terribly important. And at this point, we're really getting close to a first pass at these skin tones. Let's save our image. So what I think I can do is fix the back of the head. Let's just pick a skin tone towards the front of the scalp. And then let's go to a high strength and just fill all of this in. Let's see, maybe a little too yellowy. Although that's where the skull is. So yellowy kind of makes sense. But I still want to see a little bit more pink, a little more fleshy. Go more subtle with that tone. There we go. I think that'll work out well. It's noticeably darker here. I don't know if that's going to be a problem. Also, we're not going to be focused on the back of the head too much. But with this corrected, all of that overpainting corrected, let's go back to our dark tealish color and subtly apply that to the head, representative of the hairline. And again, splotchy is kind of what I like to do, kind of stippling all over. Turn on back face culling, normal fall off. All right, then the last part that I want to address is the ear. So if we look at our reference, ears tend to be kind of yellowy orange until we get to the outside of the helix and it goes more towards pink. All right, so we'll implement that. And this is another tricky spot. I don't want to use occlude and backface culling because it's a very occludable area, but I also don't want to shoot it through the rest of the head. So we'll do our selection masking technique and just hit L. Whoops, accidentally selected everything. Yeah, selection is slow in edit mode, so hitting A twice kind of registers faster than the program keeps up with. So we'll need to manually go to select none. Very odd that selection is so slow. What happens if I turn off multi-res? Still really slow. Strange. Don't know why. We'll deal with it. Select, none, L to select an island, L to select the other island. Then I will hit Control plus to grow the selection. Just give us a little bit of wiggle room, and then Shift Control M to select the other side. Make sure we use extend in the select mirror tool. And now I can enable X symmetry. Wait, I'm in edit mode. So let's tab to texture paint mode, enable X symmetry, and enable selection masking, disable overlays just because I like to not see the mask so explicitly. And I'm going for a yellow tone. So let's confirm that that's the way it is from our original reference. And it's more yellowy orange over here. Keep our value, our paint strength subtle. And we'll implement this yellowy tone, maybe a little more orange. And I am still using occlude, I believe. Part of the cumbersome nature of texture painting in Blender is so many settings you need to be aware of. But I've complained about this enough before. Let's see. So if you run into this issue where you've got very obvious occluding, there's not a real simple way to fix that after the fact. I think the best option is just to undo until that's either completely gone or not very noticeable. And then just make those strokes again. That's the best option. And so that is projecting all the way through to the other side. Let's undo that again. Maybe paint from a different angle. Let's go back to a more extreme orange. You know, I feel like I'm being a little too subtle on the ear right now. And if your skin tones are too subtle, it's like anything really. You hear me say it all the time. It's all about finding a good balance. Where if you're too subtle, then you won't see these tones show up in the material whenever we render it. But if they're too extreme, you know, it's going to look unrealistic. But if you're going to go one direction or the other, kind of like with sculpting, I recommend going a little too far because you can dial it back. But you can also increase saturation in the material editor. But the goal always should be to strike a balance. And I tend to make it too subtle and need to remind myself to go a little bit harder. All right, let's go back to that kind of reddish color, reddish pink. And just on the outside of the ear, I like to add that. Okay, that should be a good start, I think. I will need to fix some of this, so we'll turn off selection masking. Let's also enable occlude backface culling and just color pick with S and try and paint out this obvious artifact. Shouldn't be too difficult. With enough strokes, it'll just go away. All right, I'm going to save the file and turn off our cavity overlay just so we can see the true first pass at our skin tones. I say first pass because we will definitely need to alter this. Do not get married to this first version. Applying it to a material is going to be the real test of how accurate it is and where we need to go to make it more accurate. But this is a big first step, so make sure your image is saved. I'll save my file. And we will prepare to mess with materials.